Back in 2010, there was this game called Chaos Rings that came out for mobile platforms. It doesn't even feel that long ago. Looking back on it is weird. I can't tell you that it's a quality game in the same realm as like other single player releases from Square Enix. The battle system is kind of interesting. The story has some kind of fucked up, big heterosexual energy. It's a very biblical kind of tale. 10 fighters are brought to the Ark Arena, a little ship that travels space and time in fantastic ways in order to grant the winning breeder pair in this tournament arc. Or should I say, tournament arc immortality. Refusing to participate or losing a match results in death, by the way. You can play as one of the 4 actual couples. These 2 don't survive, ignore them. And in picking one, the story shifts around to highlight that pair's history with each other, their conflicts and their inevitable falling in love with each other. The first 2 pairs available, Escher and Musia and Elika and Jama respectively, tell the basic story, their dynamics, and build to the end reveal that winners not only win immortality, but are brought back to the beginning of the existence of humankind to populate the species with powerful warrior blood. So, yeah, there's maybe a lot to unpack with that one, but you can push their stories beyond that. Get into the system's guts, kill the Reaper, and find out that this entire program was built to try to make humans strong enough to fight the Qualia, a universe-eradicating force that will wipe out everyone and everything. See, it's morally justified eugenics. Okay, I hear it now saying it out. It gets weirder too. Beating those 2 paths unlocks the other 2. Olga and Vadi were the last arc winners, which I guess makes them everyone else's parents. And if you play as them, you find out that Vadi at some point has been kidnapped and replaced with Mecha Vadi. You see, the tournament is stacked against Olga and Vadi. They aren't real contenders. They're here as a measure of this batch of humans' strength. For them to lose means the batch is good, but if they win, then that means the batch is stagnated. So they replace Vadi with an android that looks and behaves and believes herself to be Vadi, but is genetically superior to make better humans. Wow, it's just eugenics all the way down. And, of course, Olga goes on a warpath to rescue his real love. In the post-tournament part of the story, the two square off with the Ark and insist that they're strong enough to really fight this brewing conflict and that they don't need Mechavati or eugenics, but strong bonds. Aww. And then you play Ayuda and Mana's path. Surely they're just regular people, of course. They're not. I mean, well, Mana is. Ayuda isn't, though. He's the original creator of the Ark. His memories are locked away so he could serve as a second fail-safe contestant, you see, to ensure that the batch is viable while fighting under the same circumstances as them. It's just a shame that he's wrapped Mana into this. Mana? Oh, actually, she's not actually Mana, but she's one of the princess's impersonators named Shia. Okay, look, the game concludes with all 4 winning pairs converging through dimensions to have a big, cool brawl, and they all go back to their original times, having decided that after everything they've seen and done, the most important thing for them is each other. It's cute. Now, alright. I misspoke. I keep saying that this game is this and does that and has the other, and I'm wrong. It was this, and it did that, and it had the other because it is dead. Because of compatibility issues, the game I bought for $20 over a decade ago cannot be played anymore. Anyway, let's talk about Final Fantasy. Dissidia, Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, is a mobile gachapon RPG, which means that in exchange for actual person money, you can get a bunch of in-game currency and gamble for new toys to give your irresponsibly large cast of characters all throughout the series of Final Fantasy. I misspoke again. I'm sorry. I'm writing this on a plane. We're going through turbulence right now, and the fear of death is messing up my pace. Dissidia, Final Fantasy Opera Omnia used to let you spend actual money to blah, blah, blah. It's dead now, too. I mean, you can still play it. You can join today and look at it. It functions as though it's alive. It gives tips on how to get stronger. There's a lot of content you can do, some of which is still scheduled for a later release, but it is dead. At the end of November 2023, they announced the end of service, stopped adding new weapons or characters or plot, and decided to give us some farewell content and have pulled all paid services out of the game entirely. See, I don't like to talk about gacha games publicly that much. I used to play Fire Emblem Heroes and found that I lost a ton of money to it while in law school, and that's kind of the horrible point. Games built with predatory mechanics to lure people into dropping their cash in them in exchange for some tangible reward. Technically, you don't have to do this, of course. If you're clever and lucky, you can get by on the free resources they provide you. But the kind of devil's pact constantly on the table is the looming, grotesque voice that suggests that if you missed your favorite character or a meta-breaking new thing, you could get lucky. Maybe the next poll will be the one to win it for you. This is gambling, and it can form terrible habitual patterns in people. Whoops. Remember when I did that thought experiment about what art I'd consider unethical? Well, throw this one on the pile too. Good riddance, Dissidia. I'm feeling much better too. Like the turbulence has stopped and I've proven my moral integrity. But maybe you saw this coming. I have a little more to say about this. This is the premiere of my season on garbage, after all. See, here's the thing. I wanted to wait to talk about this game until now, when the actual weaponized, unethical shit was gone. You literally cannot spend money on this any longer. And by wanting to wait until now to talk about it, I mean that I didn't want to talk about it at all. I kind of genuinely ended up loving this game. I made a big spreadsheet, I theorized who was coming in next, what their mechanics could be. I even grew to find the story bizarre and kind of good and interesting, and like, yeah, I also spent money on this, more than I'm comfortable with, which is to say more than zero monies. This game ending should be a release from a game built around making the players feel compelled to pour their hard-earned cash into it, but instead, I genuinely felt heartbroken. And maybe that's how we should begin Trashier, looking at the garbage within. Opera Omnia was a weird beast of a phone game. See, I've played a few, mostly Fae, but I also did dabble in Brave Exvius 2, and a really easy way to build a gacha game on a popular franchise is basically making your own story and then making up a justification as to why you can bring in whimsical little visions of classic characters from the series. Wait, what's this engage footage doing here? Opera Omnia did things a little different. As part of Dissidia, which is a collection of fighting games that crosses overs all of the Finals fantasies, they continue to do that. Dissidia as a series isn't just a fighting game in the abstract featuring a bunch of characters that otherwise have no reason to interact. It's a series about worlds intersecting, our heroes crossing time and space and canon to engage in epic combat, and Opera Omnia was no different. You know, this is a story about 175 or so Final Fantasy characters, and the story was about them. You know, so much so that characters were freely given to the player. They instead had to gamble for their relevant equipment. The story involves all of them, their memories scattered as they're brought into this world created by the gods Materia and Spiritus. This created world is supposed to be some kind of reprieve, like a Valhalla, if you will, where the dead may find peace and the living can take free time away from their lives to reminisce with the departed. But this world is getting torn apart, and in doing so, these torsions are threatening to damage their real worlds, so they have to band together and figure out what's doing this. There's a snag here, though, and it's kind of endemic to this genre. The game story is stuck in a perpetual motion machine tied entirely to the profits accrued. As long as the game is exactly as profitable as the company wants it to be, which is to say, more, the story will continue in perpetuity. Arcs can resolve, but ultimately we have to keep playing. There's always some kind of cliffhanger or twist or new unfolding thing. You fight to save the world at the end of Act 1 and find out that the world is dying anyway, so it's off to the Dark World to try to balance that. You fix the Dark World, but actually everything starts falling apart, both worlds. So now the Warrior of Light and Garland have to fight each other forever. Their internal conflict spawning a new world for the rest of the cast to take refuge in. It gets a little weird. You manage to bring those two into this new world and stop them from being locked in endless combat, but the world's falling apart again, so the gods Materia and Spiritus turn themselves into crystals to make a new world governed now by Anacross, the god of the video game world of Final Fantasy. And just to drive the point here, as of right now, the resolution for Act 4 for the global release of the game is that there isn't one. Leonora girl-bossed her way into making Xand join up with our party on our way to the next objective that will never arrive. It is just going to be that, suspended in animation with, as of time of writing, a promise that they will translate the final missing parts of the act that went through the Japanese version. Okay. I had this theory about Kingdom Hearts, that the story is only going to end once the game no longer projects enough profits to be considered viable, and that theory leads to many a grim vision of a final title getting launched before it's ready, or worse yet, a game that's another step in its nightmarish forever ladder that just ends off in an abyss. And the idea of that, of a story built to be continued for cynical reasons until it stops for even more cynical reasons, is haunting. Yes, Opera Omnia's final arc will at some point be translated and posted to YouTube, but the global release of the game is stuck in limbo. Playing a bunch of recycled fights, engaging loosely with a game that doesn't know it's dead. Now, is this to say that the story alone was so transcendent and meaningful and profound that it destroyed my sense of ethics and self-restraint? Well, no. First off, a lot of things can destroy my self-restraint. I'm probably going to go get Thai food after work today because the folks who work there are very nice to me. But also, the story, it was fun, and I found the experience particularly novel within the genre, but overall, what really pulled me in is something a little less concrete. Okay, one of the things I hated about Faye, for example, is that the game has kind of a frustrating relationship with its mechanics and the player base. It's a game that you can, like Faye YouTuber Phoenix Master 1, sit down and calculate answers to. And he's really good at that, way better than me, for sure. But where these things get a little less fun is when PvP is involved. See, it's actually really easy to be kind of horrible to each other in a game that favors people who drop serious cash investments in order to become stronger, where PvP will kind of inevitably favor those with deep pockets or no self-control. And remarkably, DFFOO never had PvP, which I think may have contributed to the thing that made this game stick out to me so. So before I really dip my toe into this, I want to circle back to the game mechanics a bit, because I think one of the most toxic traits really successful gacha games tend to have is compelling gameplay. Playing things like Faye or even Ever Crisis, a deeply frustrating predatory nightmare, tends to brush up on these particular issues, where the gameplay in a vacuum can be really well designed. Fire Emblem Heroes takes the core idea of Fire Emblem and offsets all of the RNG elements to I guess gambling nightmares. In battle, there is no accuracy or random chance, at least last time I checked. God, who knows these days? Look at these text boxes. I'm not reading this. No, combat is sleek and refined and precise. You know when your special move is ready, and you know every swing is going to land. The game becomes an elegant bit of number processing. It can, in higher levels of play, feel great to plan out an attack and succeed. Good job, PM1. That these often interesting game mechanics are tied to games built around money extraction feels like a sin, coming from an artist. And in fairness, Opera Omnia is not really better in this regard. Maybe in a way it's even worse, because I adore the mechanics in this game. They seem complicated at first, mostly because they carry the energy of a game that had one idea of how it would work going into it, and has since morphed into something completely different. The tutorial wants you to learn the difference between brave attacks and HP attacks. Instead of MP or whatever, every character has brave instead, which is a number with a soft cap, and the higher that number is, the more HP damage you deal when you launch an HP attack. So, build brave, dump it into HP attacks, but every brave attack saps the target's brave, so balancing having enough brave to withstand an attack before you're broken, which is what happens when you take more brave damage than you have stored, and then, you get your turn delayed from it, that's the idea here. Was the idea here. Nowadays, DFFOO has gone entirely into different mechanics. Brave and HP stuff are now kind of niche tools in a massive inventory of bizarre mechanics. Basically, every little nuance and facet of this game has at least one character dedicated to exploring it. So much so to the point that, by and large, brave attacks and HP attacks have basically just been morphed into one thing to give way to the more compelling mechanics. Like, okay, knockbacks, for example, are when an enemy has been hit enough that an invisible launch meter kicks in, and the next attack will send them flying into the sky, where characters can then, provided they all have turns up before the next enemy, jump into the air and get a free hit on them, slapping them against the border of the fight and, generally disrespecting them. It's a fun little bonus treat, like the Myconites I keep buying from the store, even though they're bad for me. However, there's not just one character that turns this into a mechanic. Reigns, Selphie, Kreis, Aranea, and Fujin all ended up having kits either built entirely around or otherwise augmenting launching specifically. Some characters have a thing where they just don't deal brave damage, or otherwise don't break enemies by dealing it, so much so that Porum, for example, became for a time the meta support because she dealt off-turn damage that didn't deal brave damage at all, just her current brave stock without depleting it. Some characters have metas so powerful that they had to make enemies and mechanics to stop it. Like, Lightning basically can have as many turns as she wants, as is her right, so eventually they released a difficulty mode that made each turn count these orbs down unless you fulfill specific conditions they all have. It made the fights really puzzly and complex to work out, and forced you to, in theory, spend the big bucks on banner characters, but... well, you never really had to, unless you were really undergeared, because there's always a creative solution to these problems, at least usually. And that, finally, brings us to the community. See, here's the thing. The DFFOO community, I'm not going to say it's massive compared to some fan bases or whatever, fine, but the Discord is full of videos of people clearing fights, even under special conditions, like babysitting an undergeared banner character through it for the purposes of getting special rewards, or using specific crystal color teams, and with 175 options by the end of it, the toolkit was overflowing. There's this huge swath of potential choices and emergent synergies with each character's kit that the game felt expansive and thoughtful, and this community got really good at figuring out these fights. There wasn't even PvP, but instead co-op, where people would work together to fight a boss and would require, trust and thought and whatnot. It's what makes this for me, right? So, look, I've been trying to be very clear and upfront about the ethics of the situation. I do not think that it's good to make games like this. Even as someone as deep in the pockets of MMOs like FF11 and 14, yes, both of them, games built on a monthly subscription, but they're pretty upfront about it, what to expect, what you're going to get out of the process. A game built on the mechanics and impulses of gambling is an unethical one, because it isn't being upfront about what it's doing. It is asking you to put in a variable amount of money on the chance that it will produce the reward you want. And even in the case of DFFOO, a game that has been remarkably charitable for a game of this kind, it's not something that I like seeing in games, and it's made all the more frustrating when I see these mechanics in modern AAA games anyway. Like, no, you can't spend real money in Engage or Tears of the Kingdom or the RE4 remake, but having these mechanics in there feels kind of grotesque. Like you're watching a major industry try and test the waters on whether or not they can start gachaponing major releases. Or, at the very least, they're preying on the nostalgia and positive responses that a lot of players may be having because of the amount of games they play that have this very thing in it. And yet, like a rose blooming through the concrete sidewalk, look at all of these people. I'm gonna try and compile together some footage of, like, the various calls to arms the subreddit ran, video guides, infographics. There's a passion here, built upon the bones of something that reveals an exploitative nightmare buried in this industry. We are all here. The Discord, the subreddit, the folks over at Tonberry Troop, the person working on a shoestring budget to make and maintain a gear tracker, and the community is everywhere. They're really friendly folks in Fae and Ever Crisis, and I'm sure in all the other gachas, because fans of these big properties like the games that exist in these properties. Stop me if I'm going too fast. There's this tendency I've seen in a lot of online spaces where when something, or more often someone, is revealed to be bad, there tends to be a collection of responders that get kind of obnoxious about it. They're out here going, I've always hated Harry Potter, or James Somerton, or whichever trans woman is public enemy number one today, and mock those miserable fools who are lamenting the feelings of betrayal and shame over this horrific event. And I think, frankly, that sucks. Mocking people for not living their lives in a steel cage of cynical realism is both understandable. We do live in a day and age that's built up a tolerance and expectancy towards everything you like secretly being horrible always, but I think it's ultimately kind of a defense mechanism. Everyone wants to think that they only have good taste, good ideas, like the good things, and it's tantalizing to be able to put yourself out there as a paragon of such things, to brag about how easy it really is to be good and support the right things and hold the right opinions, but none of us are safe from this. There is no such thing in our world as invulnerability, and opening yourself up to things means allowing heartbreak and betrayal and loss. And sometimes opening up to something doesn't have the dignity or profundity of such things as falling in love with someone or liking Fallout. Sometimes it's something that's an easy target to mock. Obviously, these stupid gacha phone games are bad and clear traps to try to take money from people, but liking something designed to be likable and appealing to people who are fans of a thing doesn't reveal an inherent moral shortcoming. It's not entirely the fault of the players that they fell into such pleasant illusions. It's Square Enix for caring more about lining their pockets than supporting the frankly excellent artists they employ. Artists that have made a game that looks like it was made on a budget of like maybe a moderately successful Kickstarter, swing so hard to develop a community this passionate. I was going to leave that there and move on, but I just want to really, really drive this point home. I'm not a huge Dissidia fan, obviously. I thought Materia and Spiritus came from this particular installment in the series, but the absolute agony of doing even just the most preliminary of research into this particular branch of the Final Fantasy Yggdrasil that is... it's so obvious that on some level, a lot of the designers that worked on this tiny phone game were here to make a Dissidia title first and a gachapon second. They cared a lot about the energy, the narrative construction, the interiorities of these characters. They had scenes where Vaughn and Rex got to meet each other, where Noctis and Lunafreya get to have a date, all while worrying about the unrequited feelings Iris may still harbor. They canonized the weird anachronisms, having Leonora meet her teacher Palom, who is in his iconic FF4 look, which is to say, a 6-year-old. I have seen a handful of gachas built around existing properties. Hell, most of the ones I've seen are from Final Fantasy itself, and what I've seen has been so stripped of this kind of attention and care, abstractions of characters, little captured memories of them, ephemeral, here to add flavor and set dressing to an otherwise okay story, or failing that, pulled entirely apart. Ever Crisis, for example, has no narrative fiction as to why these characters can join in a party together. Who cares? But Opera Omnia does. It cares a shocking amount. The team wanted to tell a real Final Fantasy story. It wanted to explore these characters, how they'd interact and enjoy each other's company, who they would trust, who they wouldn't, if Gabranth can handle having Rex around because he's repented his actions, but Rex just got here. It's twisty and weird and fun, and it's over now. We're left picking at the same rose now cut, wilting gracefully but inevitably. So now, I have to ask, down here in the murk of this property, approaching our last brand new world, what meaning is there to find here now? What was the point of this? If we can just simply point out that it's kind of horrible what the games industry looks like now. We stand in the shadow of Ubisoft leads saying we should get more comfortable with not owning games. This news happened while I was working on this equal parts deeply shameful and deeply personal script about a game I really liked, even though it was a product of callous greed. And this is what the industry looks like. Companies have been pushing to get us more and more into a situation where we have no choice but to spend through the nose to access art they are rapidly and actively denying our access to for no other reason than it is profitable to do so. All of our old 3DS games are losing internet functionality, but I'm sure in a few years we're all going to be asked to buy them again, like we were asked to buy classic Nintendo games again and again and again. We are in art hell here. Video games as a medium fit into this horrible place where their artistic legitimacy remains culturally obvious, but ultimately immaterial, with very little in the way of protection from the demands of our economic system and what people are simply allowed to inflict on their workers and their consumers. See, I'm ancient, a withered crone. I remember when people were fretting about DLC, like the sheer idea that people would have the audacity to release a game that's not a finished product and then ask for more money to get the rest. God, I wish we were back in those days, because now DLC is expected, and it's expected to be worse and pointless because the Wave 1 DLC always is. You have to wait for Wave 2 to get the new story bits. And now some of our favorite properties are just being twisted and contorted around profit margins and projections and the never-ending demand for a line to go up, that we sit in the aftermath of greed-soaked atrocity. I sit with a Nintendo Switch that holds on to the ephemeral digital memory of a Fire Emblem translation that doesn't exist as something we can buy because Nintendo was just allowed to put it on the market for a little bit of time and then remove it. I feel potently the $20 hole in my past of an ancient RPG where the Straits saved the world from eugenics simply because Square Enix was just allowed to take that game away from me forever. And maybe that's kind of like paying for movie tickets or going to see a play, but the promise is to deliver a product that you own and can access whenever, only to be informed that due to a different party changing technology, the game is gone forever. And even with film and television, copies are held and preserved, or at least sometimes they are. Chaos Rings, as it once existed, is so gone that it's now basically just a collection of YouTube videos and an incredible fan project to preserve it. One that I'm genuinely nervous of drawing attention to, lest Square Enix tries to obliterate it off the internet. Somehow, this industry has become so tainted with excess and cruelty that it genuinely feels like every new twisted hell that is wrought upon us is just something else we have to simply bear witness to and accept. Games are $70 now if they aren't free-to-play microtransactions or live services. Games are just gonna start having AI-generated things, and we're supposed to either marvel at the sheer fact that a computer generated something I don't care about, or at least just accept that this is the future now. Like, we are getting shorter games made worse with worse graphics, but their employees are getting laid off and the cost is shot up, and what are you gonna do? What can any of us do? Chaos Rings wasn't so special, so distinct and beautiful and precious that it deserves to be a household name or an industry classic or anything like that, but it had something to it, something that lingered in my mind, a vibe, maybe the kind of energy of wandering about in a quiet, empty homeworld, everyone else in this twisted place dead, just burdened with the sheer, cruel, unfair gravity of the thing your party's been subjected to. And I wanted to revisit that, to return to a thing and feel it again. And now it only exists in ways that are foreign to my past memories of it. Is there meaning to my attachment to Opera Omnia? I keep circling the drain on this, keep winding this question around in my head, because at the heart of it lies conflict. I have so many fond memories of this game. I remember following guides to the letter until I got so confident with the mechanics I started theory crafting my own clears. I remember visualizing what some of the burst animations would look like, since a lot of these characters follow themes from series to series, like Vanille would have used all of her Eidolon's attacks for her burst, or Freya would have gone into her trance and leapt up and did her Dragoon shit, or hell, there was some I was curious to see how they changed things. What would Maria get to do for her burst? I imagine maybe something with her brother, or maybe something that had her cast spells since she's statted to be her black mage initially. But the answer is nothing. There were so many curiosities, so many ideas for new characters to be added, ways to rework characters that had fallen by the wayside in the meta. Who would partner with who for their force attacks? And the answer to all of these questions have just become that there will never be an answer. Clive will never show up. Red 13 is stuck in Ever Crisis, a game that radically doesn't care about him because he doesn't have tits and wasn't making embarrassing appearances in Italy. Creativity and love and passion give way endlessly to the cold grasp of money. Except not really. That's kind of the true tragedy here, isn't it? If all of this, if every lament, all this doom posting was just that art is dying and money is choking it to death, we wouldn't really be here, would we? We've lived through horrible DLC, to horrible live service gaming, to horrible microtransaction addiction machines, to AI content milling. We've seen so many things that have posed these existential threats to the passion and joy of creation, and it is still happening. It's happening in the industry, in the depths of horrible businesses, and here. The urge to make art will never truly die. I know this. Any prediction that speaks to some total annihilation of the creative spirit, any article about how all art in the future will be us using computers to mindlessly rehash our own nostalgia, is blind. We, as people, are artists. The agony here isn't a dirge. It isn't a solemn farewell to art itself. It's anger. It's a fury that the desires to make something meaningful and to find each other through meaningful things are being used against us. We deserve better. The fan base of Dissidia deserved better, but broadly, all of us, everyone who's passionate about art, deserves more than this ravenous greed tainting an entire medium, and this rage feels so impotent, so pointless. I think about what I wanted out of this, what would have made me happy in this situation, and it's just hard to come to terms with. When asked if I would have preferred that this game never had happened at all, I didn't really know how to answer it. I wanted this game to reflect the meaning I found in it more completely. I wanted to see a version of this game I could just like and tell people about and enjoy crafting weird ideas and theories, and now this is silly, but I'm going to put up on screen the final bits of content in this game, the pittances we've been given as we hit end of service. I haven't cleared any of these yet, because I know that once I'm done with them, that will be it. It'll be time to say goodbye. And part of me feels so deeply like this has been so unfair, given the time I put into it, the money I put into it, the people I've watched, the work I've engaged with, that we say goodbye so indirectly, so informally. If I knew how to stream off my phone, maybe I'd stream them all as a farewell, but maybe it's better that this goodbye gets to happen as the rest of the game did, outside of a public platform. At any rate, I'd like to say that if by some manner of divine intervention, someone who is in part responsible for the development of this game is watching this, while I did enjoy this game a lot, way more than I ought to, far more than I expected, and while I feel its loss profoundly in a way that almost scares me, I would like to formally request that you don't make a game like this again. And while part of me longs to have the end of service reversed, to restart the engines, replant this particular flower, I want to keep this melancholy, this rose, this story unfinished. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Bees Louise, Caitlin Fisher, Cole Brayfield, Colleen T., Evan Kearns, Gail Simmons, Lewis Wells, Lorez, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lapin, Narai the Redmarked, Professor Bopper, St. Rawberry, Thomas Wolpez, Valerian Wraithwall, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.